In a previous video, we have seen how to configure Kong's ai-proxy plugin, and that allowed us to communicate with Gemini, which is our chatbot, and it is also our large language model provider. And with this configuration, we were able to ask our chatbot questions, like, for example, what was the inception year of the Smashing Pumpkins? Or what are the color of the roses? And to each one of these questions, the chatbot was able to give us its own version of the answer. But this is just the main plugin that we can use to be able to communicate with large language models and to be able to work with AI. But Kong offers a variety of different plugins that we can use so that we can tailor the AI that we want to access to our own benefit. And one of those plugins is called the AI Prompt Guard. And with the AI Prompt Guard, we can limit the type of questions that we can make to our chatbot, and we can also make sure that we are allowing certain types of questions and we are forbidding other kinds of questions. But this on the basis of a regular expression that will make sure that we get access or we don't get access, or that we allow only certain questions with certain elements to it, or that we deny questions with certain elements to them. What I have already running on my machine is the Kong gateway with the already migrated database with the method that we have seen before. So as a quick recap, we simply called this command, and this started downloading all the different containers, and then we created a service. We created then a route, which is what we see over here. This is the route, and this here upwards is then the service that we created to communicate with Google APIs and therefore access Gemini. Here we created our plugin, and here we configured it, and we given our API key created in the way I explained before in the previous video on the Gemini website, so that we have then an API key to be able to use with it. The one thing that we need to do to make tests with the AI Prompt Guard is this configuration, which again, it's done via a post request, and I have literally copied this out of their webpage. We can find their webpage over here, and here we find the AI Prompt Guard configuration. This is the URL. I will put all of this in the description, but the idea is that we can come over here and see a bit of how it actually works. This is the configuration reference that we can read through, and with this we can learn a bit more about how to configure the plugin. But for our specific example, we are only interested in 3 different properties. One is the allow all conversation history, this one over here, and then the other one is the allow patterns, and then the other one is deny patterns. With allow patterns, what we mean is exactly what we have here written: array of valid rejects patterns or valid questions from the user role in chat. In other words, what this means is that if we fill out the allow patterns field, that means that the questions will only be accepted if they are a match to the array of strings that we put in the allow patterns field. With deny patterns, it's quite the opposite. It means that if one of the questions matches one of these elements of these arrays, then that question will be rejected. And the reason why we have allow patterns and deny patterns is because if we ask a question that matches a certain allow pattern, then the plugin would allow that question to occur, except that if it also contains one of the deny patterns, then that question will be rejected. We can find also the example that I put in our example right over here using the plugin, and we can see a basic config example in this case, which is this one over here. This is exactly what I already have in IntelliJ, except that I am using an automatic way of calculating the service ID. Just as we did before, the way I calculate the service ID is simply by using this curl request, where I will just check the list of services and then finally get the Gemini service, the one that matches, and then get the ID of that service and put it here in services so that I can configure the plugin to be active on that service, thus affecting the endpoint that we use to access Gemini. An important aspect of this plugin, like with many other plugins in Cog, is that we have to give it a name. So the name here, I don't really change the name. It will be the same name as we have in the online example. So AI prompt guard. And now comes the fun bit, and that is the allow patterns and the deny patterns, and also the allow all conversation history. So the allow all conversation history, I didn't mention, but what this does is simply make sure that we take into account the history of our conversation with the chatbot. So we are now talking with Gemini, and Gemini can work in two ways. Or is Gemini aware of the whole context of our conversation, or it will treat every single query as a separate one without considering the previous inputs that we gave to it. We can find that it's useful for us to keep that context, or we can find it more useful to just make a question from the start, from the beginning, as if we had not asked any question before. Now this depends per case, and it's not easy to demonstrate in a small example how this would work or how would this benefit. It is really a per case field that needs a bit more insight than what this video can give, and it is important for us to know exactly our case before we can activate it and say that we want to consider the whole context of our conversation or not. In the case of allow patterns, then it is something different, and this is where our example begins. What we are going to do is we are going to ask questions with this chatbot, but now we are going to configure our plugin to work in a specific way. So we want our chatbot to only consider questions asked about REM. So we are just going to allow questions about the band REM. And for that, we can just go over here and do this, for example. So now we only have one element in our array, and what we are going to do is simply specify here that we are only accepting questions about REM. And it is important for us to make a small distinction here. When I say about REM, I may sound that I am referring to a contextual kind of question, but it's not that. With the AI prompt guard, we are literally specifying that we want REM in our question in this case. And so the allowed pattern is REM, and anything else will not be accepted. So that means somewhere in our question, there has to be the REM band name on it. Otherwise, it will be rejected. But we will see this when we start running the example after we configure the AI prompt guard plugin. When it comes to deny, let's say that we want to deny any conversation related to cars. So if cars is in the question, we will deny that question. We will deny answering that question. So let's say that we want to reject any question related to car, and we want to reject also any question related to jackets. Why jackets? Why car? It's just for the example. There's nothing here related to any single event that happened to the band. This is just for us to have a clear example on how can we specify to the chatbot questions that can be made and questions that have to be rejected if they contain certain words and expressions in them. And remember that this expression here, and this expression here, and this expression here, they all will be interpreted as regular expressions. And so we can put this there, or we can put a lot more complicated expressions in there. So now we've got our example ready. Let's now see if this works. So the first thing we want to do is to run this example. I will just copy paste it, but we can also just run this on the shell. Shall we just try that? Let's just run this. Okay, it says it cannot parse the body, and that's probably because somewhere here there's a mistake. And I think... Okay, so I made a small mistake. This does accept regular expressions, but it is important for us to escape the backward slash. So I didn't see that before, and that's why I was getting an error that the JSON could not be parsed, as we can see right over here at the top at this log line. So now it works. So now the plugin has been configured, and what it can now do is make questions to it. So for example, I've got here one question, but this question was more related to the previous configuration because the previous configuration had already pears in it and peaches and apples and oranges. So we can ask this question, but we need to put a dot between. So this would be something like this. Does REM ever sings about pears? If we run this expression, this should work and this question should not be rejected. So it should be able to answer this question. I'm very curious about what Gemini is going to answer to this question. So if we run this from over here, we will see that it will give us an answer, and it says, there's no REM song that explicitly mentions pears. While they are known for their evocative and sometimes surreal lyrics, a pear doesn't appear in their discography. So this is the answer that Gemini has to give us about REM. But let's now do something different. Let's say and ask, does Taylor Swift ever sings about pears? So I have to ask you now, what do you think will happen if we launch this request against Gemini via our API gateway? It will probably be rejected, right? Because it doesn't have the word REM in it. So if we run this, we will get a bad request. We won't be getting anything different than just a bad request, and we won't be getting details. In that sense, I like this already because it is not our job to let the user know what questions are not allowed. If there's a question that is not allowed, the user gets a bad request, and that's it. We don't have to guide the user through this. We may do that as an optional thing, but it's not something that we should do in terms of security. In any case, let's try something different. What about if we just say REM like this as a word, not as the initials? If we run this like this, we still get a bad request because we specified that our request needs to be r.e.m. That means that our expression is r.e.m and then anything on the left side and anything on the right side, as we can see here as we have configured. Anything on the left side, anything on the right side, and in the middle, with the backslash escaped, r.e.m. But let's do something different. Let's say that we want to ask what kind of car does r.e.m uses to go to their gigs. This should be rejected as well, but not because of REM, but because of car, which we are rejecting in the deny patterns. So this pattern should be denied, and that means that when we run this, we are getting a bad request. This bad request is being filtered out by the AI prompt guard. But of course we can circumvent these things, and this is where using the AI prompt guard might feel misleading or might be even misleading if we don't understand really well what it actually does. So we can say, what kind of vehicle does REM uses to go to their gigs? And if we ask this question, I'm curious about what Gemini is going to answer, because I'm pretty sure that this question will be accepted and Gemini will try to give us the best answer to this question. So if we do this, so already thinking, and it says there's no single answer to what kind of vehicle REM used to get to their gigs over their long career. As their fame and resources grew, their transportation likely varied. Early on, it was probably more humble vehicles like vans or station wagons. As they became more successful, they almost certainly used tour buses, which are specifically designed for transporting bands and their equipment on long tours. So as we can see, we can always circumvent these kind of things if the searches are based on one word or two words. But of course, if we make different expressions in these arrays, then that means that we can perhaps make some kind of context and really make sure that we can create something more robust in terms of questions that are accepted and questions that are denied. So for example, we also did a deny pattern for jacket. So let's just ask some question like that. What kind of jackets do or does REM uses to go to their gigs? If we launch this now, again, it's a bad request. We've got jacket there as a word. It doesn't mean that what kind of suits, for example. It doesn't mean that we cannot ask something else, like, for example, what kind of suits does REM uses to go to their gigs? And now Gemini is going to give us the best answer possible, and it's going to be that REM wasn't known for wearing suits to their gigs. Of course not, because REM is a band that plays different styles of music, but mostly sort of pop, indie, rock kind of music. And it says here their style was much more casual and less formal, typically featuring jeans, t-shirts, and more alternative clothing styles that reflected their indie rock image. And of course, they were typically in the beginning, especially in the beginning, an indie rock band. But as we can see, the AI prompt plugin from Kong allows us to specify via the text that is being sent in our queries to our large language models, especially using chatbots. It allows us to specify what kind of text should be in the questions. And perhaps that's the best way to go about it, is to understand that we are limiting the kind of questions that we are making based purely on texts, on text patterns, on anything that we can do with a regular expression. Alright, so this was my short introduction to Kong's AI Prompt Guard plugin that can be used in combination with the ai-proxy plugin to specify and limit the kind of questions that we can make to our chatbots with the large language model of our preference. In this case, we saw an example with Gemini, and we saw how all of this works together. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this was an opportunity for you to have learned a bit more about how can we work with Kong and AI. I hope this was useful for you, and if it is, please let me know. Make sure that you put a like to this video and make sure to subscribe to this channel for more videos on API gateways, on development, on Kotlin, on many other things. And please make sure to leave your questions in the comment section of this video. Make sure also to read the description, because I will put there all the different links that I have used to make sure that I would make this video as best to my abilities. And until the next video, make sure to stay tech, keep programming, be kind, and have a good one. Bye.
As a short disclaimer, I'd like to mention that I'm not associated or affiliated with any of the brands eventually shown, displayed, or mentioned in this video.